Again, thanks to the good work of FAC down in Florida, we have another predator issue story that's out of there. 36 people netted in a sting. And, you know, I guess the word disgusting and vile used by the sheriff should certainly apply here, but maybe not in the way he expects. I have a good mind to, and I may well contact the sheriff's department down there. And I believe if he has indicated, quote, at I think 16:22 minutes to 27 seconds, he says, if you oppose what I've said, you're just as guilty. Well, call me guilty then, Sheriff, because I and many others oppose what you said. And not necessarily on every bit of it, because we are at a disadvantage. And the disadvantage is we don't know the other side of the story. As you point out from the beginning of this, and this would be the Marion County Sheriff, I don't know his name, it's rather insignificant here, but they start out with his lieutenant giving out media packets with arrest affidavits, videos, mug shots. That was at 38 seconds into the video, which was produced in front of the media, which of course didn't ask them any difficult questions at all. And so what it speaks to is what I'm getting at here, and that is what was the other side of the story? What happened that lured these men into these things? The sheriff would have you believe, oh, it's just something where it was just, decoys, and they were pretending that they were 15 and they were looking for other 15-year-olds. That is the targets here, which were not under an investigation, which the sheriff didn't deny. Not under an investigation, although he talked about an investigation, he was very sly about how he used it. And I don't think he was deliberately clever. I just think he wanted to throw the word where it was going to give the best effect. But what he said was that these men posed as 13 to 50-year-old boys or girls, and these men were the decoys, and the cops, he said one time a tip, but it was very, very strangely put in there. So let's go through some of the items here. I've taken some notes. I've got post-its all up here. I'll be quite blunt right up front. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I listened to most of it. I skipped through a lot of it because I've heard these so many times before, and because time is at a premium. So let me get right down to it. Marion County, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a nice community. It's in the Ocala area. Ocala is actually in Marion, if I've got it right. And it's a college town. When I was there, and it's been some, 15 years, it was fairly small. It was very quaint, beautiful. A lot of retirees from the South, from Miami, I knew, who went up there and lived, or from Jacksonville moved down, or they went up to Georgia. But it's a very nice little community there. And the sheriff, like all tough talking sheriffs, wants you to know that you're in a bit of trouble because, in the 20 years or so since I have left South Florida, shortly after Lawton Childs died and Buddy McKay took over. If you know anything about Florida politics, McKay was the governor's lieutenant governor. They haven't had a governor there since who's been a Democrat. Whenever you have one party rule, either party, but particularly I think the Republican Party in Florida, they have quite the swagger. Democrats don't do swagger as well as Republicans do. There's nobody that pretends to be the big swinging D quite like the Republicans down in Florida, except maybe Texas. So, they're swinging it quite a lot here in this whole bit. The sheriff begins when he's introduced by his lieutenant, who, of course, is ready to hand out the media packets, right? Isn't it nice when you have a PR firm working with the police PR firm? Great deal. Not much for justice and due process, but a great gig if you can get it. The sheriff thanks the media while scolding them I love this part. Simultaneously, he says, you mislead a lot, but this time you got it right. In other words, when you do what I want, I like you. And when you do what I don't like, I don't like you. Sounds familiar? Maybe somebody in the White House likes to say that sort of thing. But true to form, every executive who has a hard job doesn't like what the media does. Of course, in my view, the media is not nearly as tough as I was when I was in the media. I asked really hard questions. They pushed back a lot, and we were able to defend against it. I'm not sure we could get away with that whole, Fourth Estate, First Amendment thing in the age of Trump. I just think it is not it is not survived as well, and it needs to. And hopefully we can get it back one day. But we have to get a very tough president who has different priorities. And unfortunately, we're going to have a priority of prioritizing the Constitution again in a very real way, such that the Supreme Court isn't even interested in. So after scolding and simultaneously rewarding and bolstering and uh, lending shade to the media, um, the sheriff that is, also addresses his other core constituency, which is the parent groups. And he says, you need to listen to this. He's scolding the parents. You need to understand what your kids are doing. You need not to be so detached. You need to know how many apps are on there. I didn't even know some of these apps existed, right? And I think he's right on that up to a point. I also think that lost in this whole thing are kids lonely, kids estranged from their parents, kids reaching out, and not reaching out necessarily to be exploited, but in the LGBTQ constituency, a lot of kids are reaching out to find somebody who would be able to be an older role model of somebody like them. And very often they don't want to meet, they just talk. Well, again, what was the role of police here? Let's not forget that. What was the role of the police? If they weren't the decoys, what were they doing on these sites? And we'll get to what sites they are doing on in a minute. He talks about the evils of the human being and claims that police are so noble and so wonderful. They don't like to get their hands dirty with this. They don't like to, they claim they just they have the ook on them. Of course, he neglects to mention how much money they make from these things or how much press they get. And now nothing quite makes police look like the good guys than when they can stomp on the head of a so-called sex offender, which I say so-called, but golly, they were calling them sex offenders. Where is it here? They had that swagger going still at 15 minutes, 50 seconds. Um, let's see. Their investigations were very tough. They dotted the I's and crossed the T's of the investigation. And I have to ask, what investigation was that? Were you investigating something or were you trolling for something? If you're running a sting and you don't necessarily have a tip, then it's trolling. It's not anything else. I'll get to some of the other things he mentioned too. They're so brazen in this, the police, so arrogant. Apparently, he was not so upset by confronting the evil of the human horny condition that they couldn't name increasingly their stings salacious and just in your face names. Seek and you will find out. Wow. They've run those before. And even though I adore FAC and they're one of the most aggressive groups out there, I will take issue with one thing in their press release. They refer to a lot of these people as sex offenders. And I really wish they would not adopt that language. I really wish that they would just simply say people convicted of a sex offense, people are charged with a sex offense, or people who have been convicted of a sex offense, but don't call them sex offenders because we don't know that yet. I understand it's a term of art in law, but we don't know that that's the case. And we keep running into cases where that's not what the police say, that I think it's worth watching our tongues on that because it also triggers what's up here. Of course, that did not stop this particular sergeant I will get to here. I'm looking for him right up here. Here we go. Okay. Um, he says that this is Sergeant John Lytle, if I got it right. I think it's Rlighttle. I think there was an L in there. I heard an L, but when he spelled it, I didn't hear an L. Sergeant John Lytle. He says we used at 23 minutes, 11 seconds. That is, we use social media platforms. I don't want to reveal. They always love to do that. Some of our investigative leads and tactics. Oh, okay. But we're on dating apps, social media maps, and apps, excuse me, and a wide array to, here's the part, to attract offenders. So you're trying to attract offenders by being on these sites. What are you doing, Sergeant, to attract these offenders exactly? What exactly are you using as bait to attract these offenders? You didn't mention that part. I think that's something that's important to know. And, correct me if I'm wrong, if any of you heard the entire gruesome thing, if you heard one reporter pick up on that and ask him, just one reporter, what did you do to put the trap together? What did you do for bait for that trap? What exactly did you do? What sort of chats can you show us in the press? And we promise we will not publish it. What can you do to indicate that? And that would be very, very helpful, I think. That would be extremely helpful. But of course, they don't do that, right? So continuing on, speaking to parents, going back a little bit here, let's say they say that they put all these people behind bars, 36 of them, but the at 6.09, the sheriff wanted parents to know that these were vile individuals, and I'm having some trouble yet trying to figure out how to coincide to link the um, video with what I'm saying here. So unfortunately, I'm not doing the video. I'll post it. I'm sure there's something I have to download. If you know how I can do that, please let me know. Eventually, I will get around to addressing it. But right now, I am ex over the just at a loss for words, obviously. But I am overworked to the nth degree here at my job. So, but interestingly enough, uh, the sheriff says that everybody, all these young people are at various ages. I think from 17 to 65. One news report that I'll post down below here said everyone knew they were making arrangement to meet a child. He says that at 7 minutes 33 seconds, and the question is, how did they know that? I thought they were posing as the 13 to 15-year-old. That is the mark, the target. How did they know? Where did the cops come into the whole thing? It's amazing to me that the most obvious question they never asked. Why didn't they ask that question in the press? Why didn't they say, just a minute, what did you do? What do you do? Right? And then he says this, the sheriff says this inexplicably odd thing, which somebody on FAC or subscribing to the FAC listserv also commented on. Why would the sheriff have a pink, police have lots of time on their hands, apparently. They were able to put pink circles or highlights around those who are going after girls and those who are going after boys. And what the sheriff says is, well, I just want you to know they're going after your sons too. Or they had a fairly innocent conversation with your son or daughter. We don't know because, of course, we haven't seen that. And for the trolls mentioning the chat logs, you've seen a lot of them. There's no smoking gun. I am going to do a video here when I have a moment, and I'm going to read my chat log, and I'll even show bits of it. I may print some out and put some up there. It won't convince you anyway, because the last time I did something like that, I was told, where's the rest of it? you must be hiding something. Because, of course, trolls knew that there's a smoking gun, and it's hard for them to believe there's no smoking gun. I was telling the truth. It's a bit of a challenge for them. Um, so what's interesting about all this, of course, and I'm not going to go on and on repeating myself as I've done yeah, I've done enough work on the other, um, similar ones where I've highlighted what the police have said in their press conferences. But where's the due process? They show these men, they hand over a packet with affidavits and mugshots and videos and arrest records and everything else to the press, which looks very impressive. But as I've shown you with the affidavit they used to enter my home, they claim that there was a juvenile, no age, no sex, listed, whom I showed no, excuse me, I showed pornography to. They didn't even say child. I keep reading that into it because that would make sense. Why would you do an affidavit? If you're going to lie, go to the nth degree. But they didn't do that. So a juvenile showed pornography. I have no idea when I could have done that. The only thing I can think of is that they interviewed my students, and this hits at the heart of the deception. They interviewed some of my students, and it is possible they pressed them. Can you think of anything at all that Asian could have done? And I could see easily one of my students trying to be compliant and work with the police, because that's what we're taught to do, saying, well, I mean, the only thing I can think of is he showed us nude statues, but I mean, it was part of the curriculum. And I could just imagine one of these detectives turning to the other one. Hey, write that down. Write that down. That's important. Because we all know, ladies and gentlemen, that if they had found something in the affidavit that there was a real live child, they would have brought it up at trial. They would have brought it up at pre-trial. They would have brought it up to the judge. They would have talked openly in court in front of my attorney or privately to my attorney, who would have told me, hey, they've got this kid, we got to figure out what we're going to do with the strategy. Who is this kid? Do you know this kid? Nothing. Zero. Never brought it up. I filed a case with internal affairs, and I'm waiting to hear on that. I was told it would take a while. Hopefully they're doing it. But I want to know who this no longer juvenile is. My guess is he doesn't exist, or she doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist, or however you want to put it. I don't think the person exists. Who could it be that they could say pornography? This is what I'm talking about. You have to ask the question. So when they get that packet and they're looking at it, they're looking at the affidavits. They need to look at the evidence. They need to contact the defense attorneys of all these folks, and they need to sit down with their people and get some free press on the other side. Look at that. Compare what's on the phone with what they say they have. Talk to the person. And then when you write your story, your follow-up, make sure you write your story where you give it from the balanced perspective of the other side. That's what I used to do. And of course, if it still makes the side that's screaming loudest look foolish, well, then that's what it does. But you've given all sides an opportunity. But that's not what's going to happen here, is it? We all know how this goes. So, again, where's the due process? According to the sheriff, he held up this stack of papers like this and talked about the probable cause affidavits. And this is somewhere between, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 15 minutes. And he says probable cause affidavits, when it's determined that the probable cause exists, and he's got quotes. He read some incriminating quotes from people who were interrogated. Again, I wish people would do what they should do and not say anything, because police, remember, when they read you your Miranda rights, everything you say can and will be used against you. And what that often means for the unscrupulous is that they got you over a barrel. As soon as you start talking, they'll twist your words around. They'll take this conversation, put it over here, take this conversation, put it over here. And folks, again, I'm so tired of dealing with trolls and others who are telling me that that's not what they do, but they can't find anything wrong with the evidence. They end up saying, well, that's got to be manufactured evidence because I believe it couldn't happen. And that's, that makes you a real good patsy for the government when they move ever more closely to fascism. And again, folks, I'm not a fear monger. I actually studied this in school. I was a teacher for 35 years. I taught government, I taught Latin, I taught Greek, I taught social studies, I taught anthropology, psychology, reading methods. I taught a lot of different things. Okay. And a lot of this is cross curricular. So you're going to get some of this in a lot of different areas. And I can tell you that it doesn't work. And I tried mightily to instill critical thinking skills, and people just psychologically cannot bring themselves to think that their favorite group could possibly be doing anything wrong. It just boggles the mind. Interesting thing about some people is they can look at their team and say, yeah, I support the team, but I don't support that, and it better stop. And then they take steps to make sure that that stops, and they make their displeasure known. And then there are other groups who are like, yeah, they must know what they're doing, and I'll just surrender my goodwill, my thoughts, my critical thinking to these other people. And as soon as you do that to groups like the police, they have you. It's curious to know that police in this whole episode said absolutely nothing about their methodologies. In fact, what they said is, we don't want to let you know, but they were on this Sergeant Lytle said dating apps, social media, a wide array of dating apps and social media apps to attract offenders. They're going to attract people they already have prejudged as offenders. That should tell you quite a lot about their methodology right there. This is Norman Michael Asian for I.C.A.C. Unpacked. Have a good day.